The government has just unveiled its proposed budget for 2027, a record 7.2 trillion pesos, around 6% bigger than this year's. And this time, flood control funding is back. We take a closer look at the proposed 2027 budget with AJ Montesa, co-convener of the People's Budget Coalition. Hi AJ, welcome to Business 360. Before we get into the budget, Q1 growth came in at its slowest in years, and based on the National Budget Memorandum number 158, the DBCC, essentially our country's economic managers, the economic cluster, has walked back its targets from where the People's Budget Coalition sits. How worried should we be? And which sectors are feeling it hardest?
Hi, Appa. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on your program. So that's a very important context when the DBM released the National Budget Memorandum number 158, which outlined the fiscal assumptions and the macroeconomic projections. It included the 7.2 trillion, and it's really important to note where our economy is in that context because, yes, 7.2 trillion is a record number, but we always have to remember the backdrop of measuring it as a percentage of GDP, for example. So at the start of the administration in 2022, the BBM administration had forecasted or targeted 6.5 to 8% growth. And at this point, we're now projecting 3.5 to 4% growth. And in the next 2 years, that's around 4 to 5%. So our growth is a lot more muted now. And that budget, therefore, is in the backdrop of a weak economy. So that 7.2 trillion that we're talking about, we have to really ask, is that something that will be delivering social services to the people? Is that something that will be invested in strategic infrastructure to make our economy more competitive? And is that something that will be responsive to the economic and global headwinds like the oil crisis, the energy crisis, and even looming food shortages in the future?
Yeah, well, as a government economic manager, you would know that government spending has a direct effect on GDP. So, they need to spend to sort of pump prime the economy in a way. But really, lack of infrastructure spending was considered a major cause for the contraction in GDP growth in 2026 so far.
Right, that's correct, Apa. The lack of growth in the first quarter of 2026 and even the latter half of 2025 really was driven by sort of a chilling effect because the government was now afraid of spending the money that it had allocated because there was outcry against the flood control scandal. And when we think about it, it's correct to point out that the government needs to be spending the money, but at the same time, it really was just a correction of what had been happening for the past 3 or 4 years already. So as early as 2022, and when we analyzed the data, there were red flags dating as far back as 2019. There had been already red flags when it came to infrastructure and DPWH budget. So even if the government had been spending the money back then, there were questions on whether this is actually spent properly, whether this is going to the right priorities, the right strategies, the right targets, or is it going to politicians' pockets? And the flood control scandal just exposed the systemic corruption that had already been taking root. And there's just a market correction that's happening right now. So we really need to clean up everything on that front to ensure that the money that we're investing, that we're putting into the budget, actually goes to the place where it needs to be.
Your group, the People's Budget Coalition, is an alliance of different civil society groups, business groups, researchers, and grassroots organizations. This year, the civil society groups were given a formal, still limited, but formal role in the budget process, including observer status in the House and full transparency of the budget at every stage from the National Economic Plan, Expenditure Plan onwards. Can you tell our viewers what that engagement actually looked like over the past year and where the limits were?
Right. So that's an interesting story. When the flood control scandal came out last year, it was right after the president's SONA. So it coincided with the preparation of the National Expenditure Program. And by that time, the House, supposedly the House of Representatives, was already supposed to start kicking off its budget deliberations and budget hearings. So at the time, because of the outrage, if you can recall, that there was a change in the speakership, there was a change in the committee chairmanship in the Committee on Appropriations, and back then, the House passed a resolution that they would include civil society as observers. Back then, they claimed that this was the first time that this was actually happening, but it's not the first time. Members of our coalition recall that prior to the pandemic in the early 2010s and late 2000s, civil society had been invited before. But because of the pandemic, things sort of changed, the practices sort of changed, and that's why a lot of corruption had gone unnoticed. They were able to hold hearings almost in secret, without observers, without minutes, and that's where the insertions came in. So because of that, because of the flood control scandal being revealed, that's when they decided to bring civil society back. So we got invited as observers in the House, which means that we were able to attend the public hearings. But our assessment of that was sort of mixed. There were a lot of hearings that we didn't get official invites. For example, there was sort of a small committee on the budget amendments that we didn't get invited to. We only learned that there was a live stream as it was happening. So I think there's still working out how to properly engage civil society. I think the main difference is in the Senate, where the Senate chair on the Finance Committee that handles the budget was Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. So under his leadership, he did institutionalize, for example, a transparency portal for the Senate, where all the presentations, all the budget documents were posted on the Senate website. He held a hearing where he invited civil society not just to be observers, but to actually speak and to provide technical inputs to the budget process. So that was very encouraging. I think from the Senate process onwards up until the BICAM, we were more encouraged by the process there. And I think now that the House and the Senate have a feel for how they can engage civil society, we're hopeful that they can continue this. We're really encouraged that Senator Sherwin Gatchalian is the Senate President, and we hope that his mandate for transparency in the budget process will continue in this budget cycle.
Great. Were you allowed into the bicameral, which used to be a closed door meeting? So
Yeah,
this
that's a
time,
good point. That
yeah.
it used to be closed door. We were anticipating that we would be invited in person as well, but unfortunately, I think that didn't work out. So all we did was we monitored the live stream. So even though it didn't meet our expectation, I think it's still worth acknowledging that the live stream of the BICAM is still a huge accomplishment that was only made possible because we kept on making rallying cries to Congress and to the Senate that they need to open the budget process to restore trust. They can't do business as usual as they tackle the budget.
This expanded role came after the flood control scandal. Now, having tracked the 2026 budget from the National Expenditure Plan onward, what's your read? Is it cleaner?
I think cleaner, since cleaner is a relative term, I would say it is an improvement. The problem is there's a saying that the bar was on the floor. The budget the previous year, the 2025 budget, a lot of analysts are saying it was the most corrupt budget in history. So
Yeah.
if you're coming from that, any improvement, of course, is cleaner. It's an improvement. So yes, there was improvement in the budget. But still, we found by the end of the entire process, we found at least 541 billion pesos worth of red flags. So these are not corruption per se, but the red flags that we spotted include things like hard pork. So these are infrastructure projects, hard projects that really need scrutiny. So we have been mobilizing our volunteers to really check these projects and see how they're implemented on the ground. We are getting volunteers from church groups, from different civil society groups to monitor and see if these infrastructure projects are actually being implemented. Then we found the soft pork. So these are the ayuda programs. Ayuda programs, they look good. They're politically sexy. Because the politician can get involved in the handing out of these ayuda programs. But at the end of the day, we flag them because they do tend to become patronage driven. So they're used to buy votes, for example. They're used to curry favor with the voters, not really to forward any developmental goals or to provide a systemic social security system like PhilHealth, for example, as a contrast. So we flagged those items, and then the final flag that we also raised was on the unprogrammed appropriations, which we call shadow pork. So the shadow pork, it's shadow because it almost functions as a parallel budget where it doesn't get the same level of scrutiny because it's unprogrammed. So it's not itemized to the same granularity as the rest of the budget. And so it became sort of the modus operandi of how legislators could have their insertions to either hard pork or soft pork without raising those flags. So because we flagged those, the president had to react and he had to veto some line items in the unprogrammed appropriations. But still, the remaining items, when we totaled all of them, that's still 541 billion pesos worth of red flags that now that the budget for 2026 is being implemented, it really takes a lot of civil society, private sector, businesses, church groups to really monitor how this budget is being implemented right now.
Yeah, monitoring, that should be the job of the Commission on Audit. I mean, why are we forced to do it?
I'm not sure. I mean, well, civil society does play an important role. So, for example, when the hearings started taking place on the infrastructure, the ICI, the Commission on Infrastructure, we did submit, for example, our findings, the anomalies that we found on the duplicated projects, on the insertions. We compiled all of this data. We used a lot of statistical analysis. We used some AI to generate some insights, and then we forwarded this to so the members of the committee. So I think it goes to show that independent observer civil society is very important because the problem is if it's only government talking to each other, there could be a tendency for collusion among government actors. If kumikita sila, di ba? Pwedeng mag-usap-usap, and then since there's no outside observer, then that's where they tend to have their insertions, that's where they tend to have their corruption. So it's always important to have civil society, independent media, private sector groups always watching and making sure that everything is above board.
Okay, well, that's a funny situation. But I guess in terms of our development as a nation, we're forced to do this. Now, let's go branch by branch. How did the executive do on transparency, especially the Department of Budget and Management?
I think our experience now with the DBM is they really are determined to restore trust in the budget process. There's a new secretary, but the sort of reform started when it was Acting Secretary Rolly Toledo who started implementing more transparency and participation. And now with the new secretary, Kim Robert De Leon, we've had some good talks with him. He's very open to having civil society as active participants in the budget process. So we're not waiting anymore for the budget hearings in Congress. As early as now, we were invited to, for example, technical budget hearings. So even before the National Expenditure Program is being prepared, civil society already has a role to play. So we're very hopeful that the DBM continues to expand its push for transparency and participation for civil society.
Okay, so how would you rate the transparency and cooperation of the House and the Senate? You already said that Gatchalian gets your vote, right?
Right. So Senator Sherwin, I think, really passes with flying colors. I think there's not a lot that we could ask for more from him. I hope he does continue the work as the Senate President. I think for the House, we did have some good touch points. For example, with the CPBRD, which is the Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department, which does work on taxes and budget in the House. They were very open with us. They really tried to consult us. But I think there is a need for a better participation because in the House, since we didn't really have a role as resource persons, we didn't really have the ability to speak during budget hearings, unlike in other technical hearings of other legislation. Many civil society observers can also provide technical inputs. This time in the budget, we were wondering why we weren't given that opportunity. So there are really a lot of points for improvement in the House. So I think that's something that hopefully they can continue to work on.
Yeah. Some of the people behind your analysis are also economists and data scientists. What did you actually use to go through this vast amount of data, the multi-trillion peso budget? Did artificial intelligence and other progressive data tools play a part?
Yeah, we do have some good friends, some partners. If you know them, they're from BetterGov PH. They are a group of civic tech volunteers who really have done a lot of work in integrating new technology like AI into the process of really analyzing the data. So we are the group that has been fondly called the Angry Nerds because although these nerds are very introverted, we're really not fond of going in public hearings and everything. We do the technical work of analyzing the data using technology to find red flags, and they did a lot of the work in, for example, mapping the insertions, finding networks, and all of these things, doing that kind of analysis. So yes, that was part of it. But also, I think it's very important to acknowledge the different sectors that we work with, representing, for example, labor groups, health workers, different sectors, education advocates, transport advocates, who, although they're not, the high tech space, they do have knowledge that's particular to their sector, particular to the department, and they also help spot red flags. They also help ask questions to keep the departments and agencies honest. So I think we need more of these people to be more visible in the budget process, and hopefully, again, Congress will allow space for this kind of participation in the budget process.
Well, hats off to the angry nerds, huh? The executive submits the budget, the 2027 budget, in just a few months. So, what are your stakes going into that cycle? What do you want to see fixed? And how has the DBM been responding to the pressure so far?
That's a very good question. This is a really important and critical juncture at this point. The president will deliver his SONA in a few weeks, and of course, he will try to frame his accomplishments. But as I mentioned at the start of the interview, if we look back to where we started in the BBM admin, we have already missed our targets, our growth targets. For example, our deficit was supposed to be at around 3% by this time, but still it's above 5%. We're not going to hit the 3% level by the end of the term, and maybe even by 2030. Our debt to GDP supposed to be below 60%, but now we're above 63%, and that doesn't seem to be going down with the pronounced deficit. And the impact of that on the budget is that we are now paying more in debt service burden or debt service interest payments, which means that that's money that's being taken away from essential social services. It's being taken away from healthcare. It's money that could have been spent on more classrooms and education. So that is really what the stakes are when it comes to this budget. And the corruption that was exposed had a chilling effect. So I think the most important thing right now is that the administration has to restore trust in the process. It has to restore trust in the institutions, because without that trust, then it's very difficult to legislate a strategic or an innovative budget. So once that trust is restored, then we can start talking about the finer technical details of the budget and how it's spent. So that's really what our goal is, to shine a light more on the budget process, to involve more stakeholders, so that we can have a more transparent and active participatory process when it comes to the budget cycle, and a budget that is really more focused on providing essential services for the people, especially in times of economic headwinds, rather than a patronage driven or a corruption riddled budget.
Okay, finally, you don't do this alone. How does the People's Budget Coalition hope to work with its partners going forward, including new partners? So you have, of course, the private sector groups, the business groups, the civic tech builders. Is everyone pushing in the same direction, or do you each have your own agendas?
Well, of course, everyone has their own, I wouldn't say agendas, but everyone has their own interests. So, of course, some groups are more invested in seeing budget towards health, budget towards education. But I think what binds us all is we really are invested in a budget that is for the people, that's for the Philippine economy, it's for Philippine development, rather than a parochial patronage driven system. So we're all trying to incorporate our advocacies to achieve that change. Again, from the private sector, of course, everyone from the private sector would like to reduce the red tape, would like to reduce the corruption. In civil society, we would like to see better social outcomes. And then, of course, in the civic tech space, they would like to see more tech being introduced to make the budget cleaner, more transparent, and more innovative. So that's all coming together. Again, we're really volunteer driven. We're really driven by the people who are just passionate about this thing. And we hope that we can collaborate more with the decision makers, like the DBM, like the House of Representatives, the chairs of the committee, the Senate President, and even the President himself. If they really truly are committed to addressing this issue and restoring trust, then they have to realize that they can't do it on their own. They can't do it in their political silos. They really have to give this power back to the people to restore the trust.
Wow, that's great. Thank you very much, AJ Montesa, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Apa, for having me on the program, and good afternoon.